Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to whomever you are, wherever you are on the planet. This is Peter, and welcome to the June 30th broadcast entitled The Zeitgeist Movement, Complaints and Attacks. I've cut off the introductory music so we don't waste any time. I've also shut down the chat. While I know many of you love to chat during the broadcast, for this instance only, I want to shut it down just to make sure people actually listen to what I have to say. We did a thread post for people to insert anything that they have heard that's negative about the movement or even their own personal views. And I have assessed this, I think, an eight-page thread post, which broken down was about 90, I think like 93 or 94 specific points, ranging from, fairly legitimate to absolutely absurd. The beauty of this program is I'm going to treat the absurdities with respect, very simply, because we'll just basically assume that people who think some of the more outrageous things about the movement, we'll just assume that they're being honest, when I think in a lot of cases it actually more comes in the form of propaganda. But I'm not going to waste any time. Here we go. Number one. My philosophy professor stated something along the lines of, quote, "People want to be involved in society. We cannot remove the human variable entirely from maintenance of society, for this would produce a sense of discomfort and helplessness in the population. Why can't people distribute the resources themselves?" Okay. Open market style distribution, which is I assume what the person submitting this is getting at, the person quoted is getting at, is provably inefficient and a wasteful practice. When you review the systems theory-based model that the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project presents with regard to resource management, production, and distribution and other attributes, the underlying logic of preservation and strategic use should be very apparent in this methodology. We are interested in creating a system that is as total as possible, a system that's designed. We have to take into account the demands of Earth legitimately and couple that in with demands of the population. The Earth is a fully symbiotic and interdependent natural structure, as all I think would agree. Therefore, our means to organize our interactions needs to take into account everything possible before we make any type of relevant decisions. A resource-based economy includes a system of public interaction that allows for each one of us to introduce ideas for social organization and goods production. Examples of this are included in our PDF guide. People will be more directly involved in society really than ever before in a resource-based economy, not by selling goods or resources, but by contributing to the development of actual products, goods, processes, which continue to better society as a whole. If you want to create something, there is a system available for the submission, evaluation of your idea, and then to put it into manufacturing, for an example of a good anyway. It's really that simple, and as outlined in a lot of our materials, you can find it again in the PDF. Nothing like this exists today, by the way. I mean, again, the reason people do not distribute resources themselves is because it is too detached from the state of natural affairs. It doesn't take enough into account. Remember, our current economic model is based on the assumption of infinite resources in part. At no point has the human population been faced with the depletion of a given resource that was extremely important to society. This is unfortunately changing. We will be facing these problems. The pattern is now changing. And if we don't go into strategic preservation mode and adjust our values accordingly, we will simply exhaust ourselves faster. Number two. The ideas we are aiming at are magnificent, but I don't see a concrete way to treat our sick psychology, or culture, into an understanding one. Specifically, since our culture has very strong defense mechanisms built into it, I propose a more aggressive, nonviolent, and cutting-edge psychology approach. Okay, well, that's a fair point. The fact is, history has shown that broad social changes can happen. While the current culture is going to be very defensive towards this direction for the many traditionalized reasons that are a part of their identity, the coming breakdown of society, which is pending, is likely going to shake up many enough to a point where they begin questioning their values and the institutions that they support. This is the nature of biosocial pressures. As we as the movement We simply have to do our best to educate as quickly as possible, and we're open to new avenues to do so. So, hope that's clear. Number 3, the Venus Project, the Zeitgeist Movement, has not developed a transition strategy that is applicable right now. The world faces immediate problems, and we have real solutions right now, but the movement is focused upon education about some unrealized future possibility. This is like a doctor that is showing the cancerous patient nanotechnology and the way we will use nanotechnology to battle cancer in the future. Okay, well, I understand your frustration, but let's back up here. Unless you're a prophet, there's no way to create a step-by-step explicit method that will guarantee anything regarding a transition out of our current system into a new one. All we can do is average out various scenarios and be prepared to adjust dynamically. I really shouldn't have to point out the lack of clarity available with regard to the transition, and it has nothing to do with the motivation that really points us into the direction that's needed to implement a resource-based economy. In other words, to clarify that, it's like saying that you're hungry and you know you need to eat, but since you have to drive a long, confusing, complex route to the grocery store to get food, you decide it's too much, so you never eat again. The ambiguity of the transition isn't a problem to me at all, frankly. I mean, either people begin to understand the reasoning for resource-based economy and adjust their values and interests accordingly, or we don't transition and we likely destroy ourselves further. That's my view. And regarding your issue about the immediate problem the world faces, the immediate problems the world faces, and the implication that we are not doing anything concrete, let me counter that by saying that the Zeitgeist Movement's focus will do more in the long run than any organization around today. Why? Because we're the only group that has the courage to point out the central problems at hand, which is the market and monetary paradigm we live in. I cannot think of one other large, I cannot think of one large global problem which really isn't related to the established system and its and the policies inherent in its governance. We can send we can send money to poverty-stricken countries till the end of time. It isn't going to change the reason why those countries are poor and why the impoverishment has begun to start with. Excuse me. We can also keep building prisons to keep all our supposed criminals, yet, of course, this again does nothing to stop the origins and hence reasons for the so-called criminal acts themselves. So I hope you better understand our disposition. Number 4, money will not disappear. It will evolve into something that is more scientific, designed to address goals of the community like abundance. The concept of money evolves in an emergent fashion. Science would be nowhere without accounting and exchange of realistic information. Well, the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project do obviously idealize a complete move away from using certificates of debt, which is essentially what modern currency is, as a method of payment and exchange, etc. The transitional nature could come in many forms. Again, we could have energy credits, which were proposed by technocracy many years ago. I don't see problems with this particular idea. And there are many other variations that have been talked about by other groups regarding economic reform for the better. However, I think it needs to be reiterated here that when I use the term money in talks, I'm referring to the entire market system and the dynamics within. Money is the blood, if you will, of the system itself. The need to change the system, the needed change to the system that needs to occur, I'm not being very clear. The change that needs to occur is most likely not going to be gradual. While I agree that the monetary system could be altered to be more efficient and humane, there are some foundational attributes of the monetary system that are still going to be destructive inherently, even at the very core basis, isolated no matter how you break it down. For example, the system is based upon consumption to fuel GDP and hence economic growth. This characteristic must be outgrown. And when you realize that, you begin to see that there's very little that can be salvaged from the current financial order as applied to a new system, hence the resource-based economy. You can't have a system that thrives on perpetual consumption in an environment of finite resources. And that is the basic fabric of the monetary market paradigm. So I hope that's very clear. Number 5, The movement is similar to religious people who await Armageddon in that many members believe that the transition will be dependent upon an essential collapse. The danger in this belief is that many people do nothing to prevent collapse. Well, that's an extreme way to look at it. No one that I've met in the Zeitgeist movement has stated that they want to see total failure, collapse, and human suffering. That's not what anyone wants. Rather, we simply realize two basic things. The system is showing signs of collapse now due to the very nature of its processes. The resolution of this will not be achieved by any traditional notions of reform, as far as I'm concerned. And as per the awareness of the movement I previously described, we are here to focus on the root causes as we can best understand them. If we want to stop the collapse, we have to intently move into a new system, not work to patch up the old one as a means to an end. This doesn't mean we should not help each other out in the short term. Please give to your local charities and do what you can, to ease the suffering that continues to be prevalent. I walk around New York City with a pocket of $1 bills and change, always giving to people, homeless people that I see, which are almost endless now in the city. But I'm not dumb enough or naive enough to think that such an act really brings any resolution in the long run, okay? It doesn't matter, really. It's just temporal. And, actually it just reminded me of this old Living Colour song from their great album, Stain, called Go Away. If I remember the lyrics, are, I see the starving Africans on TV. I feel it has nothing to do with me. I sent my $20 to Live Aid. I've aided my guilty conscience to go away. And that is essentially the mentality that you tend to see, hidden or not, amongst the majority of the people. No one's willing to address the root causes because it becomes so difficult and so heartbreaking when you realize the actual foundational problems of the system we live in and the radical changes that are required. The second thing I'd add to this is the sociology. People are likely not going to change their indoctrinated views until they are pressured into doing so, especially if they're relatively comfortable or they think they're relatively comfortable. These are biosocial pressures again. I'm sorry to say it, but human beings as of now seldom act in actual rational ways. They hold on to previous identity associations and they collar everything around them to fit their sense of personal integrity based on how they see themselves. So change becomes always a problem in this regard, and it's no surprise. I mean, this culture doesn't reward being wrong. Being wrong is considered a terrible thing. You're inefficient, you're insufficient if you happen to be wrong about anything. Therefore, people are terrified to admit they're wrong about anything. But anyway, I won't go on that tangent. Number 6, there are many people that are in the movement who are disgruntled with their current situation, and they dogmatically uphold the tenets of the movement with no desire to seek understanding. Hold on 1 second. Okay, there isn't much I can say in response to this, for it doesn't actually provide any information. I'm not directly responsible for the inability of any person to understand our materials clearly. And no single person is representative of the movement's tenets and goals in and of themselves. I am not individually representative of all attributes. This is an emergent development, and there's many things that we haven't even realized yet. But the basic fundamental goal is underlined still. But there will always be change over time. So I'm sorry to hear that some people might uphold dogmatic elements. That's certainly not what we condone, and all I can hope is that they will eventually overcome any forms of dogma that they've created. Number 7, people who respectfully oppose aspects of the Zeitgeist movement are eventually kicked out of the movement. Okay? Actually, no. First of all, the movement is anyone who agrees with and works to help the direction we condone. I'm going to assume that the person who submitted this point is actually referring to the pattern of user suspensions which occur on our global website's forum. To quickly clarify, no one has ever been removed from the website's forum for, quote, respectfully opposing aspects of the Zeitgeist movement. This notion is a sensationalized contention propagated by a small group of persons who most likely have been suspended from interacting on our global forum, and as a result of this, in a completely vindictive manner, they turn around and cry like little children to anyone who will listen, declaring, oh, the Zeitgeist movement banned me because I disagreed with them. It's really sad to see the petty revenge mentality that is dominant in this culture as well. But then again, it should be no surprise. Everywhere you look on television and in films or books, it's one revenge fantasy after another. So it's reinforced as a constructive value, unfortunately. Okay, look, there are only two ways you're going to get suspended from the Global Site Forum. One, you don't actually advocate the movement, and you don't support it or encourage it. The forum is provided for members of the movement who have gone through an educational process so they can openly discuss on a relatively high level the issues apparent without the noise of those who would just come to a free site out of boredom or have no education or even have malicious intent to disturb and harass, which in fact has been the case. Yes, the prerequisite for interacting on the global forum is to have an encouraging fundamental agreement with the direction. If you don't agree overall, then you have no reason to be posting there. Anyone can read it too, by the way. It's a matter of posting. So if a moderator sees a person showing no support or encouragement for the basic direction, then yes, that person will be removed, and that's that. They'll be reviewed first, of course, and then removed. It's a fundamental understanding within that medium of communication. And this also applies to the other communication mediums, but this is predominantly forum-oriented because it's usually the most common. So that's that. Now, there's only one other way anyone will get suspended, and that is very simply if you get insulting and disrespectful and belligerent towards others. There's a huge difference between, quote, respectfully arguing a given point and then throwing out ad hominem attacks, demeaning rhetoric, and other conflict-inducing beratements for ego satisfaction, typically. Naturally, we all have our bad days. I can have a bad day and get offensive in general, in my general walks. I'm a victim of culture just like anyone else. But in the event a normal user becomes hostile that's been around for a while, they're warned. We keep account of things. It isn't some black and white yes or no scenario. Everyone who has ever been suspended from our forum knows exactly why they were so. And the game that these vindictive people play by crying at how their suspension was the result of respectful disagreement is really just a pathetic attempt at petty outrage and nothing more. Number 8, the Venus Project is putting all their eggs in one basket, and their plan to create a movie and a theme park. Why not implement a strategy that empowers the Venus Project ability to create change like local currency and self-sufficient communities that target scarcity and education as some of their main objectives? Okay. The Venus Project has their own ideas about how to get this information to a wider audience. They are not putting all their eggs in one basket. They are seeking, various means to better express the direction to the public at large and essentially begin to change values, which is really the first stage. That's really it. There's plenty of other things that they're doing. They've been on a tour for God knows how long now, and I think they're only halfway there. It's incredible what they're doing, an absolute exhaustion. I can't believe Jacques has it in him to do this, and just what an amazing pair to literally just perpetually travel right now and spread this information. It's incredible. So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're simply expressing what they think might help in the next level. And using media in the mainstream is not a bad idea whatsoever. So as far as local currencies and the things you talk about, I fail to see a long-term benefit for local currency specifically. As far as self-sufficient communities, there are many other groups out there working on this. And the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project have nothing against such a pursuit. We don't put down any of these issues. That's just simply not the direction that we're condoning. Please note that we're in phase 1 of the movement, and our focus needs to be on awareness first. This is the process we are unfolding. We would like to see people not have to go back to an agrarian culture after some horrible collapse of society. We want to start this change now and not have to see everything destroyed and then people pick up the pieces and start new. This is not the way things should happen. It doesn't have to work that way, even though there are some indicators to say that is a possible consequence. So anyway, I hope that helps. Number 9, I like the movement, but for some reason it doesn't seem to be making any progress. Like the knowledge base, for some reason, is taking a long time to grow. Okay, well, the knowledge base on the global website shouldn't be considered a measure of progress, and I'm sorry for the delay. I live in a state of perpetual multitasking, and I have a number of articles that are in preparation I intend to publish there, but I just want to make sure I have time to finish them and get them nice and clear. They're dealing with complex issues that require very specific language and structures. As far as the actual measure of progress within the movement in our current phase, the basic stat to reference is the number of people in participation and the growth of our chapters. From this angle, we're progressing very, very well, better than I ever imagined, in fact, globally. I do a quick synopsis of the current state of things in the opening article of our July newsletter. So if you want to reference that, you can see a brief description of what we're talking about. And if you really think about what we're doing, there's no global precedent. There's no structural institutional precedent for what is happening. So we're walking in very new territory. So we just have to be positive about this. The fact that we have as many chapters as we do in so many countries is mind-blowing to me, regardless of how small some of them might be. This is the seed that needs to be planted. We are still in infancy. We're not even 2 years old. Compare that to what other organizations have done in a global sense that have been around for decades. You'll find that there's a profound reality to what we've actually accomplished. Number 10, I'd like to hear a few responses you've found to be most effective to address people's claim that the Venus Project proposal is too huge and it will never happen, or we are 1,000 years away from something like that, etc. Okay. Anyone who says what we advocate, quote, can't be done, or that it will never happen, is failing to take the history of social change into account. During Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr.'s time, you can rest assured that their critics were telling them that their aims would never happen, ever. Moving to the field of science, science itself has continually disproven one projection of the impossible after another. Really, the issue is the intent. If you think it will never happen, then it won't. If you think it will, now you have options to work with. Once again, I see the changes coming one way or another due to the instability that is going to emerge as the unsustainable practices of the current model are fully exposed and experienced. The only question to me is how much suffering will need to occur before people get motivated enough to push for a new system. Number 11. I've come across several people who, despite their ignorance, claim that the Zeitgeist movement has a lot of big ideas, but there is very little concrete follow-through. Basically, can you emphasize the need for gathering critical mass before attempting the next step? Yes. Back to the prior point, people sometimes lose encouragement when they see the difficulty that lies ahead and the magnitude of what we are trying to achieve. The Zeitgeist movement, again, is in its infancy. We can't do anything until we have more support for the direction. It's like two people going to Union Square in New York, holding up signs, trying to draw attention to some social problem. Most people will walk past these two people with very little regard, but instead of two people, if there were 2,000 people, suddenly people are going to say, well, there's mass interest, so therefore I might be interested in listening. This is the simple reality of mass influence and the need for critical mass. Number 12, here's a singular statement. There is nothing scientific about the Venus Project and a resource-based economy because there is no scientific evidence to support the claims. Well, this statement can only be correct if one was to ignore the 80 years of scientific investigation done by Jacques Fresco. Jacques has hundreds of inventions, patents, and has personally described to me the various methods he used in his lab to consider issues regarding technology, transportation, infrastructure, and the like. More importantly, actually, the scientific foundation of the Venus Project, and hence the Zeitgeist movement, does not even really rest with Jacques Fresco or the Venus Project's ideas alone. It really rests with the whole of scientific inquiry and the very methodology of scientific theory itself. As Jacques has stated, we wish to update society to incorporate the most advanced understandings we have into the social system for the betterment of everyone. This is an interdisciplinary approach. The problem today is that we have all these amazing technical solutions. We read about sitting on the sidelines, nanotechnology, molecular engineering. There's just so many interesting things, advanced forms of solar radiation capturing. I could go on and on about the advancements, aeroponics, hydroponics, all sorts of complex vertical structures. Anyway, but the problem is we see these things, but there is no way for them to be made economically feasible at this time in the current model. they're often too sustainable or too radical to the established order, where the change required to maintain profitability for the current power establishments in those industries is too long, and therefore they just simply fight the technology because they don't want to have to endure the transition, because they'll lose lots of money or lose their power. The Zeitgeist movement wants to harness these advancements immediately, and put them all together, and hence update the social system as a whole in a unified way. Now, that said, let's not forget the basic premise of the Venus Project, which is resource management as the starting point for relevant decisions. And this isn't an opinion. This is what physical law demands for our for our survival in a very simple sense. And this is utterly scientific by every account. So that claim holds next to zero merit. I mean, why anyone would say that is to dismiss just about everything that we've ever referenced and talked about. Number 13, here's a singular argument. All of Jacques Fresco's designs and ideas are stolen from R. Buckminster Fuller and other predecessors. All right. Well, anyone who will read both authors will see both similarities and differences. To say the ideas are stolen is idiotic and absurd. Also, everything Fuller discussed was extracted and extrapolated from prior researchers on some level as well. Got to remember, all information is serially processed by way of influence and education. Everyone steals everything, and it is the novel nature of their personal conditioning only that allows for new seemingly original ideas to come forward. Even if everything Jacques talked about was outright plagiarized, which it most certainly is not, it wouldn't change anything with regard to the reasoning for the direction we pursue. Number 14, the monetary system is not the problem, it is human greed. Okay. There's no evidence to say that human greed is a cause in and of itself. Greed, usually meaning an excessive desire to possess wealth or goods, can only be a cultural phenomenon. While it is obvious that we are driven by an internal appetite to eat, and in the event of scarcity we might be forced to fight with each other to obtain food, this is very different from greed. The fact is, greed is a value required for the current system to be maintained. If people didn't constantly want more and more, the economy would suffer. This propensity is supported and reinforced by the monetary market paradigm, in other words. As far as the first point about the monetary system, quote, not being the problem, well, my head would explode for me to just bypass that. And I want you just simply to go back and review virtually all of my lectures that have been done. And if you still feel that the monetary system is not the problem, email me for such a statement as to ignore just about everything that I've ever talked about. Number 15, a top-down global approach to the redesign of society is impractical, some say. The local sustainability paradigm is the only workable solution, providing your own food, energy, transportation individually or in a community no larger than 1,000 persons. Okay. A resource-based economy is based in part upon localization. This is why fresco city systems are what they are. Everything is as self-contained as possible. Seemingly paradoxically, however, a resource-based economy is also a global system. Why? Because, again, we must monitor all earthly resources in order to make intelligent and sustainable decisions about excavation, production, distribution, and everything associated with social operation in a clean manner. In fact, to say the resource-based economy is impractical, as you have, is to merely say it's difficult, really, in effect. For what is actually being talked about is likely the most practical concept, simple, obvious, logical, social design ever put forward. It's completely simple what Jacques has been talking about, and the logic is not custom at all. It's foundational as far as I'm concerned, near empirical. What makes it seem impractical, again, is the current state of affairs today and the constant perpetuation of what really is a false, unsustainable system which the public blindly holds on to due to their own indoctrinated associations. So, from the angle of transition, yes, it would seem impractical when it's really just difficult. But from the angle of methodology and logic with regard to the Earth system and the physical science apart, it is the most practical idea that I've ever seen. Number 16. I tell people that the plan going forward is to build a model city to test the idea while increasing awareness of this direction until at some point this model for society will gain the needed momentum. The opposition complaint I receive is a statement such as, the only way this could happen is if government takes control of large amounts of resources owned by businesses, corporations, and people by force, basically by stealing. People will then be left with nothing until the government makes the transition, if they are even able to. Okay. Once again, we're hitting a we're hitting a transitional snag, if you want to refer to it like that. To say everything is taken by force by the government is a projection. So, the goal is to create consensus and agreement amongst the world's people on this basic level that we talk about. People will not be opposed to ideas unless they hurt them directly, most likely. No one is going to have their property taken from them in such a manner. The process would be gradual as the model is implemented. For example, energy resources would be nationalized in transition, perhaps, as they should be today, frankly, along with all public utilities and eventually food production. The trick is to create a situation where money does not reinforce the self-preserving incentives. That's an important point. The problem with government control in the past is that it is often, it's often been very shoddy in what is actually produced, and this goes back to market dynamics and the need for governments to cut corners just like corporations. This has to be avoided somehow, but back to your point, the reality is that consensus will need to be achieved in order to avoid conflict, which is why the educational imperatives of the Zeitgeist movement are so critical. A corporation will not fight the nationalization of its industry if it knows it will not suffer because of it due to the benefits of the new holistic system. I hope that's clear. Number 17. My friends keep saying there are no details to the safeguards to prevent one or more members of the interdisciplinary teams to take power over somebody else. I've already explained to them that the decision-making process would be designed in a way so this couldn't happen, but they want details, details, details. Okay. Blind fear of other human beings is a sad reality in our current state of evolution. I'll never forget when Alex Jones on his radio show asked me, who makes the decisions in this new system? And I said, no one. Decisions will be arrived at through the methods of science. And his reaction naturally was of total bewilderment as to what that could even mean. And most people have no concept of methodology versus opinion either. Look, people are not born corrupt. Corruption on any level is a social and cultural distinction when it comes to behavior. The abuse of a human being by another, such as acquiring gain from the suffering of another human being, is 100% a cultural phenomenon. It has to be. Otherwise, why would it be done? We live in an economic social model which is based upon either being parasitic of each other or prostituting ourselves directly. It should come as no surprise that many fear each other in the current model, for the entire model is based on a pseudo-Darwinistic contrivance of economic survival of the fittest, to put it in a bizarre way. Given this logic, if you take away the fear that is being created, you take away the consequential responses. So the question becomes, what reason would any individual in a position of social governance have to abuse their power? There would have to be a reward for this abuse to serve as a motivation and hence reinforcement operantly. Let me explain it this way. Let's assume I live in a house with 10 other people, each one of us using the facilities of the house, including the electricity. In the basement of this house is the fuse box, which governs the electricity, and any of the 10 tenants could go down at any point and vandalize this fuse box, cutting off power to the whole house. Given that possibility, should we just, lock the fuse box? Just because there's a possibility? Why would someone vandalize something that is helping them as well, in other words? Just because something is possible doesn't mean it warrants attention as a viable action. For example, terrorism. The global war on terrorism is, in my opinion, a pathetic, wasteful idea, even if it was of a genuine intent, which it largely isn't, for it's a political ruse essentially to chase ghosts and nothing more for various political reasons and budgetary, military reasons. If anyone wants to go out there and blow up a plane or do anything to hurt any other person or group in any manner, They will find a way to do it, period. It doesn't matter how much security you have, someone with an intent to destroy and be destructive will achieve their goal one way or another, given the amount of time necessary. True security does not come from building fences or more prisons or installing security systems. It comes from facing the actual causes of such behavior and adjusting the environment accordingly. In a resource-based economy, there is no reward for power abuse in any way we think of reward today. So, that doesn't mean that certain levels of redundancy are not in place for problems. I mean, I would consider an act of abuse in this context by a person as comparable to a technical flaw in the system of governance itself. And the solution to these problems would be levels of redundancy built in. So I've jumped around a little bit there, but I hope my disposition is clear. Number 18. This one came when I showed my professor Zeitgeist Addendum. He said to me that the fourth part of Zeitgeist Addendum is like an insult when you say that the, quote, social values of society, blah, 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 are a result of a collective ignorance of the emergent and symbiotic aspects of natural law, unquote. He said to me that you are insulting people by saying that they are social problems that are due to ignorance. Okay, first of all, the definition of ignorance is commonly a state of being uninformed. To say someone is ignorant is not an insult, even though it often appears to be interpreted that way, which again illuminates this neurotic fear we have in this culture of being wrong about anything. But that's for another conversation. Regarding the emergent and symbiotic relationship, this was a Filmaic generalization, simply saying that people largely do not consider their interconnected relationship to the environment around them, and likewise, they often think what they know or what they've been taught is complete and total and empirical, and are avoid the idea of change and being incorrect and all the things that I've talked about at length before. There's a constant path of change, and we should embrace this reality rather than fight it. Sadly, most don't do that today. They want to preserve their identities. So I think your professor is misinterpreting what I'm saying in multiple ways. Number 20. Numbers are skipping here, but I'm just going to read them as they're posted. Number 20. It's actually 19, but there's a jump. Number 20. Noam Chomsky allegedly said that the Zeitgeist movement is a passive movement because we do not launch protests against the establishment. I want to ask why boycotting the establishment is far more effective than just mere barking at the establishment. Okay, well, we're in the initial phase of the movement. I can see how we could be referred to as passive by those who don't really know any better about our direction, which in the case of the supposed Chomsky quote, that's probably, it's obvious he hasn't reviewed anything. But nevertheless, we're in the first phase. The Zeitgeist movement protests and other angles to influence society globally in unique ways will occur. We just don't have the numbers again to make such a real impression. We're in a developmental stage. Number 21. Here's a singular statement. A giant computer controls everything. Well, obviously no. This is a common projection from those who watch too much science fiction. The global nervous system that we speak of is simply a technical system that tracks resources and establishes logical strategies to most intelligently utilize these resources based on the goal of long-term sustainability. Of course, there's accounting for negative retroactions and recycling and all those things. We're not going to go into all that. Basically, this is a system of feedback which uses the scientific method to arrive at the best conclusions based on the available data, avoiding human opinion whenever possible in the process. This system is constantly updated with new data and programming. It is a tool, not an omnipotent digital god that will condemn you to massaging its microchips against your will. Number 22, the Venus Project founders sell DVDs. Okay, here's another singular statement, obviously questioning the integrity of the Venus Project. Yes, it's true, but I'm afraid the current social model demands that all human beings either sell themselves or sell something else if they want to get money to live. The Venus Project sells educational materials, yes. It also has a 501c nonprofit called, I believe, Future by Design. If you would rather see Jacques and Roxanne get jobs waiting tables for their income as opposed to selling informative materials to expand knowledge about a possible better world, well, I would have to disagree. Any cognitive dissonance about the issue of any of us selling things is unfounded and idiotically naive. Number 23, the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project are a cult. All right, well, what is a cult? The term cult is really a pejorative, meaning it has an explicit negative denotation. In other words, it's an insult in most contexts. There's no group out there which I've found that self-proclaims itself, as a cult, that understood what is the historical precedent for common accusations of cultish characteristics. That's the real question. Does it fit the profile of what has been traditionally defined as cultish? Well, almost universally, cult relates to religious groups. This is found in most clinical definitions. So, okay, in what ways are the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist Movement religious in its doctrines? Can you find any? We promote nothing more than the recognition and application of advanced sociological and scientific understandings. We want to move from wasteful arable land practices to water-preserving aeroponics and other important technical transitions as such. As an example, we want to get out of the oil paradigm and begin working with a systems approach to renewable resources which we can statistically account for in regard to their possibilities and applications. We want to create a systems approach to get a full understanding of our operations on the planet. These are all various points that we talk about in our materials, and they're very active. The fact is, we fit zero characteristics of any cult because we are emergent and based our understandings on physical reference and inferential logic. I guess you could say scientific thought is a cult if you really wanted to be insulting about it. I mean, anyone can use this term against anyone. We don't base anything on, say, dogmatic religious books that never change, or any unified set doctrines that are not subject to feedback and alteration. There's no worldview held that relates to anything sacred or divine. None of this enters into our language. We also do not follow or worship anyone. We are a community working together for a common goal based on a set of shared understandings and hence values. We have goals and we work on processes to obtain these goals. We are tangible. Cults are not. Number 24, the Zeitgeist Movement doesn't do any science. Well, that's not really true. Lots of members engage in scientific study. And as I have said before, Fresco has been working hands-on for decades. I remember a story he told me a while back about how his lab was repossessed many years ago because he couldn't pay his debts, and it was a big hit to him because he had to stop his experiments for a good period of time. Anyway, our work is again based largely on the application of known advanced methods. We simply want to implement them for social concern directly, updating society to present-day knowledge, as Jacques puts it. Number 25. Please address the movement's advocacy of a computer-monitored, technologically developed society upon the standard of the scientific method, where within the scientific method does it state that technology must be utilized in order to facilitate the human condition, nature itself. Okay. The fact is, advanced tech is only needed to continue our general standard of living as we know it today, coupled with the growing needs of the ever-expanding population. You're simply not going to be able to provide for everyone on this planet if advanced technical means, as applied to industrial methods, are not utilized. This is a modern reality. As far as the aspect of computer monitoring you speak of, this is to ensure that we have an accounting, again, for all the resources of the planet while keeping tabs on the rate of depletion and everything else. I don't want to belabor that point again. Please see Project Earth in my Where Are We Going lecture done at Maharishi University last year for a relatively detailed description of this bottom-up approach to global management. Number 26, a fundamental tenet of the Clinton campaign in the 1990s was the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." That being said, would it make more sense to advocate this movement from a strictly socioeconomic standpoint? In other words, basing our argument in a very straightforward text as to not overload anyone. Well, that's an interesting point, and it really just depends on your audience. As most know, I focus on the problem. In my talks, I tend to focus more on the problems than the solutions. Why? Because it's more logical to start that way, really, in conversation. Yet, the socioeconomic system that we have is not detached from other issues, such as human values and current methods of government as we know it. These are all interlinked, and hence we must treat them as such. I understand your point, however, and I think the basic notion that we advocate a move into a resource-based economy is generalized enough to serve as a singular context. Just tell people what our transitional goal is, and then you can fill in the blanks from there as a simple way to describe it. And that's the best example I can give you. Obviously, this information is not easy to bring up to most people. It will require a great deal of explanation to those who have never heard of it, needless to say, but this is the difficulty of education. But overall, we're not just a socioeconomic movement in general clinical sense. We do extend to other attributes. Then again, you could probably redefine socioeconomic to include most everything, so we could change the definition if you wanted to encompass the values and government attributes that we also describe. So I hope that helps. Number 27, the Venus Project is dependent too much on the web, and in case of internet regulation, it cannot function. All right, well, we can only deal with one problem at a time. In the event of the internet being shut off, we'll have to regroup in more traditional ways. Frankly, I don't see this occurring anytime soon. As much as the U.S. and other countries would like to go the way of China with regard to internet freedom or lack thereof, there's simply way too much money being made and too much of an association now with the internet in regards to freedom itself that such a change would cause an outrageous, I think, amount of public outcry. I don't think the state has the courage, in other words, to make such a move, unless they create some form of threat, which they can use as an excuse, as history has shown. Given the fact that over, I think, 40% of the U.S. population believes, and I believe a 2006 Zogby poll, that the U.S. government lied and or was covering up issues in regards to 9/11, I think the fear card is beginning to be overplayed. And the people in power know this, and they know the culture is growing numb to these constant hits of fear and things that are often used for political purposes. Number 28, my complaint is that we are expecting everybody to join the movement to start revealed truth like we have the absolute truth. We don't have to be fundamentalists. We have to learn how to engage with other movements that have some differences with us. I think I understand your question, and I overall agree. We're not avoiding interaction with other groups. We're simply faced with the complex reality that many other socially conscious groups do not understand what we advocate at all. It's a bold statement, but it happens to be true. How can we interact with, say, Greenpeace if Greenpeace still supports the market system holistically? This is a complex issue, and we are all doing the best we can to bridge the differences, of course, without compromising the fundamental tenets and intents that we have overall. Number 29, the movement loses credibility if it is seen as a pure educational movement, quote, it's all talk. Well, sure, we are an educational movement in this phase of our development, and anyone who doesn't understand why needs to go back and review and understand the complexity of what we are trying to do here again. Until we have enough support to create true pressure, create effective pressure globally, we're more or less helpless in action. Also, the true foundation of change has always been new information and awareness. So to say that we don't have credibility because we focus on education rather than some physical city system project or like is to ignore the foundation of what really creates social change, which is the change of mind. To begin with, new information starts just about everything, so I'm confused by the statement. You have to change your mind before you can change behavior. It does bother me, I want to add, that so many people out there are so gung-ho right now on physical actions that they really lose sight of the overall zeitgeist itself, meaning this sort of climate of perception, intellectual perception. Even if we built a new city system tomorrow, it will not change people's behavior who are coming out of this old system today. So keep that in mind. Number 30. I don't see a change being done by one social movement Instead, I see it as the union of a movement comprised of movements allowing change. Well, I think I already addressed this, and I generally agree, but the integrity of the direction must be maintained. We cannot compromise our foundational tenets just to reach agreement with another group arbitrarily. This, again, is complex. I mean, I'll say it again, patchwork methods, which I'm sorry to say is what virtually, all of the current political, social, environmental movements of the day deal with, are not ends in themselves. They help, but they're not ends. The other institutions really just need to understand the foundation of the problems and then work to alter the root causes, and that's simply the basis that we operate on ourselves. Number 31, I know you've heard this from others. A resource-based economy is an impossible sell to the general public, big business, and government. You're opening a war on three fronts with no allies. That's why the Venus Project Zeitgeist movement is just an educational movement. The times are too serious for an educational movement. That's why some people are discouraged and complain about the movement not doing anything. You need a seamless solution that would minimize the disruption to society. Otherwise, the people will reject it. People resist change, and they rebel against total change. You stated the phrase, the times are too serious for an educational movement. I have to tell you, I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. I suppose we could all just get upset, have no direction, run into the street, set things on fire, right? Like the idiots did at the G20 in Toronto. Granted, they were probably agents of provocateur, but to allow for more police restriction to enable certain things, but still, does that do anything? This is why traditional protest is now a total failure. The more violent an uprising, the more security, distance, and weapons will appear in the next protest. This is, again, the genius of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the secret of nonviolent protest and peaceful public disobedience. But back to your point, we are here to get people on board to move toward a new social system which will remove, again, the foundational causes of the turmoil you see in the world today. Until this is done, all the patterns will continue. I don't know how else to explain it to people. It's not going to change. I'm sorry to say, all the in-between activity or the patchwork, while beneficial for some in the short term, will be nullified in the long run, for the cancerous system itself is still in place, pumping out sickness. Again, I'm not saying people shouldn't be proactive in the current model in detached ways. Please do. But the goal of the Zeitgeist movement is different. Number 32, full automation in all areas of the economy isn't possible or affordable. Okay, well, first of all, who said anything about full or total automation in all areas of the economy explicitly? This isn't a utopia. The reason for automation is based upon technical feasibility for one, along with the statistical reality that the more we mechanize, both in physical labor and decision-making, the more accurate and productive the results become. In fact, it doesn't really matter what we are capable of at any given moment in the end. The direction doesn't change when we see the result. If we in society seek to be as efficient as possible, which I hope is part of our goal, then we will objectively implement everything that fits that goal without dispute. The application of mechanization in a resource-based economy will be will be as liberal as technically possible, taking into account, of course, the resources used in the machines and the computers, of course. So I hope that clarifies the issue. We're dealing with a particular intent. It's not an all or nothing scenario where if we can't automate every single form of labor in the world, suddenly the system doesn't work. That's not at all what we're talking about. And again, you also stated affordable. As far as it not being affordable, we're talking about a resource-based economy, and there is no such thing as affordability in the system. The question is not, do we have the money? The question has always been, do we have the resources and understandings to make it happen? Number 32, singular statement. A moneyless economy isn't possible. No distribution control is possible. It generates stockpiling, black markets, etc. The central system of resource monitoring, extraction, production, distribution that we talk about is extremely simple in theory. Money does not need a place when things are made available to people coupled with an understanding that our values must not be based upon our fleeting cultural whims, but rather upon the state of the physical world itself. There is no reason to stockpile something you can get freely, such as food, in other words. You certainly can't sell it. There's also no means to sell anything in the black market because there's no money. I suppose people could barter if they really wanted to, but why? The entire basis of the system is to create environmental balance and a relative abundance derived from what is actually available on the planet itself, organized strategically. I'm going to say that again. The entire basis of the system is to create environmental abundance and balance derived from what is available on the planet, organized strategically. How else can I explain it? Look at it this way. Generally speaking, everything that you see in your local grocery store today, or the mini mall, or even the department store, can be made available right now for free if everyone had the intent to work together and share and collaborate rather than compete and hence protect. Number 34. You can't change people that intensely. Hold on a second. You can't change people that intensive. How would be needed to? I guess English is a second language for this individual. It appears that the point is we can't change people enough to fit within a resource-based economy. Okay. Well, when it comes to change, there's really no evidence to say that people can't change in the ways that we describe. We see forms of altruistic social behavior all the time in pockets in all of our societies. The problem is that the system itself doesn't reinforce such altruistic behavior. Therefore, the dominant social propensity is still to be selfish and self-serving. The unique and sad reality is, however, that people do not realize that the more self-serving they are and short-sighted they are, the more they hurt society and hence themselves in the long run. I remember talking to John Perkins about the mentality of corporate CEOs, and he stated very clearly that he had never met a CEO which was just simply malicious, and having no regard for society or anything. Rather, John described it as a form of short-sightedness created by the need to generate profits quickly for the business and hence the shareholders. This is the goal of a CEO. In that mindset, there is a casual disregard, look the other way mentality, which is created, and this is the real problem. The companies that pollute, exploit, and abuse really don't do it because they enjoy it. They do it because they have to in order to maintain a competitive edge in such a cutthroat economic system. So that's really what it comes down to, and I hope that answers your question or your point. Number 35. Computer government isn't possible and wishable because machines could be manipulated by some high-tech elites instead of money elites like now. Okay, I already covered that. If there's no reward for abuse, the abuse will subside. Number 36. Abundance isn't possible in all areas, i.e. mineral resources are scarce, whatever one does. If one focuses, only on the resources of the planet alone. Okay, in a resource-based economy, which is a global system of resource management, resources are strategically distributed across the globe when needed, based in part on consumption statistics. To say abundance isn't possible in all places is to forget the global nature of the system itself. So, number 37, unifying people of different cultures, countries, and religions is daydreaming, which I assume they mean is improbable. Well, one can simply decide it isn't possible, or they can try. The fact is, all religions and cultures share the need for basic resources. This is the indisputable common ground I have talked about at length in many lectures, and I can guarantee to you that a starving family, for example, will likely give up their Bibles, their trinkets, their church visits, and their sacred symbols for food and shelter that they so desperately need. Social health and the attributes therein is a near universal constant. A simple natural law, if you will, is that everyone must eat. Everyone must take in calories. From there, a systematic logic begins to emerge, such as, okay, well, I need fresh water. Maybe since I need fresh water, I shouldn't dump our tribe's waste into the river we drink from. Maybe we shouldn't keep burning all this carbon in the present day, which is hurting our air quality and the ecosystem, which we need to live. You see the point, hopefully. While I agree that the bridges between cultures are a challenge to build at this point in human evolution, I completely agree, there is still 1,000 times more similarities between every culture on this planet than there are differences. What unifies us is the environment we all share and the need to survive. And we can either kill each other over it, or we can come and work together for the betterment of everyone. Number 38, statement, a resource-based economy is ridiculously difficult to implement, and if ever successful, it would be wiped out by the elites who have all the power in their hands. Okay, well, we're all human beings. We are all victims of culture, and the elite are, in fact, ever-changing. It's a propensity, not a group. There is no they in any static sense. And while I agree that there will be a great deal of opposition coming from the upper 10%, which control 95% of the world's resources and wealth, I can assure you that time will overcome this conflict. For the lack of sustainability in the actions of the so-called elite's current model is illegitimate. It cannot be sustained. In addition, public pressure, once critical mass is achieved that we talk about, will render the elites absolutely powerless. I'm not going to go into such methods that I've thought about now. The first stage we're in is critical mass. This is the greatest fear, in fact, of the establishment, and why divide and conquer is a virtual mantra. If people begin to work together, the system will fail. It's contingent upon division. And the elite will be helpless, for they will have zero power to act. Why would the police help the elite at that stage, which gives them nothing? When the police themselves and the military officials begin to understand the state of the cancerous system we live in, when they start to think about their children and the state of their children and everything else, it will become very clear. We live, again, in a giant, contrived social game, and there is nothing in this game that cannot be changed if enough people come together to make it happen. The elite are an illusion. Number 39, there is no tangible transition plan. I think I've already kind of addressed this, and I will actually also be putting out a short film of sorts in hopefully the near future regarding the way I see and the information I've collected regarding the possible transition. So I'll do my best to get that out there. But then again, it really changes nothing. Number 40, the Illuminati and conspiracy themes, such as 9/11 as an internal job, makes the movement look unprofessional. Well, we need to collar our biases, for they do nothing but interfere with reality. The intellectual bigots and those who try to inhibit free thought by creating controversial, taboo, and hence uncomfortable associations, which are thus deemed irrational or, as you put it, unprofessional, is just a cop-out perspective designed to try and stop people from thinking for themselves. It's that simple. Sadly, the self-appointed guardians of the status quo pride themselves on trying to interfere with the personal exploration of, individual exploration of subjects that are considered taboo. They impose a quality distinction upon them that tries to make people feel stupid, dumb, embarrassed, or uncomfortable for even considering an idea that is condemned by this so-called majority. So it's all nonsense. Everyone out there needs to stop giving a shit what others think of you. There is a big difference also between a person providing you with objective information for your consideration on any given subject and a person who just condemns you for your interest and or conclusions, imposing a stigma merely because you dare to ask the question or even consider a hypothesis that is contrary to what they feel is correct. Beyond that, more specifically, 9/11 truth obviously has nothing to do with the Zeitgeist movement directly. And as far as the Illuminati, That idea doesn't even exist in my films, nor have I ever condoned such a thing. From my research, very quickly, I came to the conclusion a long time ago that the Illuminati as a term exists now merely as a fear-based ploy to sell ignorant people books and DVDs on the premise of fear. That's it. There is no official Masonic group anymore, and the idea that this group controls the world today is, to me, nothing more than an easy way out, superstitious scapegoat. And you also tend to find, as much as I hate to say it, but I'm just going to be honest, that fundamentalist Christians are the one that seem to push this New World Order Illuminati stuff the most. And it fits in well, in fact, with the kind of good and evil delusion associated with their dogma, so it should come as no surprise. Anyway, I won't belabor that. Number 41. Without forced labor, like now, there isn't enough motivation, there isn't enough motivation there so that a economy can work. Let me state that again. Without forced labor, the economy won't work, is what they're saying. Okay, well, this is a kind of a common argument. It's the assumption that people will have no incentive to work if they're not getting paid for it. Obviously, human beings work for money in our current system. This money translates into the ability to purchase needed goods and services. In the system we describe, a resource-based economy, money is removed, but people now have access to goods and services they need without a price tag, cutting out the middle issue. A person, I think, who grows up in this society without the previous baggage of our current system, they will understand the system clearly, and they will contribute to society because they understand the intrinsic need and relevance to do so and how it benefits them. You know, I think we're going to overcome this narrow self-interest, independence, and people will eventually evolve to realize that their social contributions are in fact what create their personal quality of life, and that's how the system is essentially set up. Social interest becomes social interest. There's really no other way it can work. We have to grow out of this I only work for money or time is money value, which has been created today, unfortunately. While I agree the tendency is there because it is reinforced, there's no reason to assume people can't behave differently in a different environment. Also, people do many things today which do not require money. People have hobbies. They like to build things. They work with their hands. They do research. They help poverty. They give to the poor. They do social work without money. They do so because they enjoy it. So, you know, one of the other goals in a resource-based economy is to make sure people aren't forced into areas that they actually don't enjoy. They need to go into fields of interest, which they really appreciate. As a final point on this, remember, we work towards mechanization as a goal wherever possible. This will eventually create a direct move towards the removal of repetitive human labor first. What I think this means, and I'm still working on data sets for this because I'm going to have information like this in my film, is that the 8-hour days will no longer exist anymore. Odds are people will work for the system only a few hours a day, likely not even every day. This will be a powerful paradigm shift, and no one is working in fields that are not relevant as they are today just for income. There are no waitresses, cashiers, window washers, garbage men, or the like. No one is out there looking for work that's irrelevant to social progress simply because they have to get money to survive. And that is a cataclysmic point if you give that some thought. Final point on this, please understand the interest to move into mechanization deliberately, removing the monetary relationship, is a logical progression due to the trend of automation technology and hence technological unemployment. As far as I'm concerned, the jobs lost in the present day are not going to be coming back for many reasons. We're likely going to see 15% unemployment in America, 20% unemployment in America, and even 25% unemployment in America before the Obama or succeeding administrations put forward some very broad socialist reforms in order to basically stop the instability that will result. This tendency is also reinforced not only by historical patterns, but more scientifically, Moore's law, if you want to have a general distinction, which is the phenomenon of exponential growth of technological creation expanded towards multiple mediums, not just microchips, as Moore's law tends to denote. Granted, we have the law of diminishing returns. All those things are apparent, but we're talking about a multifaceted evolution of technologies in an interdisciplinary sense. Anyway, I don't want to belabor all of that, but I hope I answered your point. Number 42. Someone in my family thought the overall idea was okay when I first explained it to him briefly, but he found a major flaw that exposed its flaw. He said, "What about big, strong guys? What will they do? They need something to do, or else they will destroy everything like Rambo did." Basically, he said that some guys who are built strong just need to go out there and fuck shit up because that's, quote, how they are, and, quote, it is what it is. He basically explained a Rambo incident as being inevitable because of human nature. He expressed his concerns about how big testosterone-filled guys are just aggressive and they will go out there and break everything. Okay, I'm going to silence my amusement. Let's go to the center of your question. Do neurochemicals and hormones cause actual behaviors? Are they independent initiators of commands? What has science told us? No, they're not. Numerous studies have been done regarding testosterone specifically. In fact, I recommend a book by Robert Sapolsky called, I believe, The Trouble with Testosterone. And in the book, he details studies done which show a very limited effect of testosterone and how only in extreme, nearly unnatural human levels of the hormone present is there relevant behavior modification. It's an overall myth that a person with high testosterone is more aggressive inherently than a person with normal levels. It takes an environmental trigger to pull these levels up high, and that's the real revelation. So, while I'm sure some people have a higher propensity towards aggression than others because of their internal chemistry, it still takes an environmental trigger. For example, getting a person extremely angry by maybe assaulting them might trigger a heightened testosterone level, which makes them more aggressive than somebody else who wasn't just punched in the face. So keep that in mind. There's no evidence of a situation that I've found of a person who is consistently aggressive which didn't come from an environment that bred that aggression in some direct way. And this is a public health issue. Just like child abuse or other forms of violence, the sources need to be found more explicitly, and the public needs to be educated so they can stop patterns of behavior that cause such human aberrancies to begin with. Once again, as I think I've recommended before, a doctor named James Gilligan, who spent 2-3 decades as a prison psychiatrist. He's now, I think, at NYU. He was at Harvard before. He dealt with some of the most violent killers ever known in the United States in maximum security penitentiaries, and he states explicitly in all of his research and books that the causal relationship of their behavior is their upbringing and environmental influences holistically. Number 43. How much time do I have? I have 47 minutes. I think I'm doing all right. I think I might actually get to everything. Let's find out. Most people love the cities. Number 43. Most people love the cities how they are, and will never leave their cities to live in the Venus Project cities, regardless of how advanced they might be. Well, I don't know. This probably isn't true. I mean, some people are traditional and like to stay with what's familiar and comfortable, and others have an interest to travel and see new things and be in new places. So there's no universal. While it might be a problem for some, I think the benefits will outweigh. One could say the same thing, about us moving out of caves, evolving out of caves and moving into, primitive huts or what have you, other structures. Every broad social change is met with some kind of culture lag. That goes without saying, historically speaking. But, I think adaptation continues, and I don't see this as a real problem. It really would just be temporal. I think the benefits of the new sustainable cities will really invite people. Anyway, number 44, there's no concept how different cultures, religions should live there together without creating parallel societies, acting on their own and even against any resource-based economy ideals. Okay, well, those religions that choose to isolate themselves will eventually realize, hopefully, the futility of their protectionism. I used to live under the Williamsburg Bridge in Brooklyn, and I was friends with some of the Orthodox Hasidic Jews that lived right across the street from me at the beginning of this massive 100-block radius of essentially their cultural expression. And if you walked into this area, it was like walking back in time or through some Eastern European Jewish block somewhere. It's really amazing if you've never been there. They have their own schools, they have their own stores, everything's written in Hebrew. It's unique, and it's obviously a detachment created for protectionist reasons, so they stick together. This kind of self-imposed segregation, though, I'm sorry to say, is only detrimental in the long run and only creates imbalance and feelings of division. And I really don't support such segregation, whether it's obviously not deliberate segregation, but self-imposed segregation is a patchwork means to avoid the real problem. There's really nowhere for any of us to hide. So again, I'm well aware of the religious conflicts that we face and the cultural conflicts that are faced based on what people have traditionally been known to traditionally have associated themselves with. But I'm sorry to say we're just going to have to grow up. The needs and similarities of all humans that we share, the needs we all share, along with our interest to survive, is what will unite the species holistically. The more we divide ourselves, the faster we fall. Also, if you look at the historical patterns of race and cultural integration, we see a general trend moving towards unity almost on all sides, slowly but surely. I mean, it's happening, and the more science has become a tool which has proven its benefits for people, the more common ground will be achieved. For regardless of your religious or cultural beliefs, you are still subject to the physical laws of nature, and this profound yet fundamental understanding is, I think, what will transform the dominant social values of this planet when we begin to share a common methodology for conducting operations, which is the scientific method. It's a profound change in sort of an age of reason, if you will. Number 45, the elites and resources owners see, I've broken English here. The elites and resource owners see no reason why they should accept a resource-based economy and give up all their resources and power. I see, so no one wants to give it up. I've already addressed this. They will have a good reason when they understand why the system described will serve them better than their primitive traditional idea of hoarding and protecting in the most, in the manners that they do so. It will serve them better to engage in a new system, and the sustainability of the species will be even more supported. Power and resource ownership, and hence restriction, only creates conflict, as we've seen for generation after generation. And as I've said, public pressure can override these issues if need be in transition. Number 46, the politicians will never accept cybernetic governance due to its threats to their existence interests. The same for mighty lawyers and judges of all kinds. Hopefully everybody followed that one. Well, that would be applicable in a system which still had money. I'm sure the elevator man was rather upset when he was initially replaced by machine and mechanization, but I bet he moved on to something else. Such is the nature of evolution and change, and people simply cannot stop this progression. We must adapt and update based on new information. There are countless jobs which no longer exist due to the advent of technology which overcame them, or adjustments to society which made them obsolete. The removal of judges, lawyers, politicians is just another step in the chain. So I hope that helps. Number 47, the capitalism collapse is improbable due to, in history, it has recovered somehow again and again, even on the cost of the enslaved have-nots. The biosocial pressure won't be that powerful enough to move people to a resource-based economy. People will move rather to other social groups like communists, fascists, theocrats, criminals. Okay, let me see here. Anything about this? Well, okay, that's a particular assumption. While I agree that the financial system, which again is just a big game, can recover on some level, the true problem comes from our misuse of resources and not the economic system in and of itself, because it is just an abstract game. The real collapse will come from the economic effects of economic-related effects of energy resource depletion and mismanagement initially. I think it will then move to water and food problems for the poorer nations. I think in social pathology I discuss the growth paradigm we live in as well. And basically we have a growth paradigm for sustaining our current model, which is in direct conflict with the finite resources of the planet. This combination, let me clarify that. You can't have a system that's based on exploitation and consumption to increase the so-called growth of society and expect that to be sustainable in a finite environment. So that combination, coupled with, again, the continual loss of labor due to mechanization and the exponential increase of technology is what will create what we could refer to as true collapse, which, of course, collapse is a very relative thing. Really, all it takes at this stage is a serious energy crisis of some kind as an initial starting point, or resource crisis. Every country right now on the planet is in debt to other countries. The planet is, in theory, broke. This inherent financial limitation that exists today will only serve to escalate and compound the real resource and infrastructure problems that we face as well. So I hope that answers your question as far as the sort of causality and the nature of the lack of recovery which we can expect. The more people go out and buy automobiles to support the economy, and of course auto sales are often mentioned in regards to GDP growth and economic recovery, the more energy goes into those fuel cells, the more gas is used, and the more we waste our resources the more quicker we waste our resources. So I hope you understand the difference between what's happening now versus what has happened in the past. We're faced with real physical barriers now, and this is one of the first times in history we ever have been, and the economic system only compounds and exasperates it. You mentioned other isms, as far as people moving to other isms like communisms and the like. This is why the Zeitgeist movement is here. We have to get the word out about this new option social system that we describe, so people do not fall into the same cycles of reform that they continue to do, playing the game of politics and everything else. So I'm going to start moving more quickly now because I only have 38 minutes left, so bear with me. Number 48, what about crackheads? If everyone is free to do whatever they want in this lawless world, why should the couple of people who do work to keep the lights on bother when they're the only ones who do a job? They won't think it's fair, and with no government, everything will burn down and we'll all be swimming in our own poop. Wow. Well, I think this one takes the cake as far as showing virtually no awareness of the system being advocated. Where to begin? Okay, first of all, we're not going to wake up one day with the legal system not existing as we know it. It's just not going to happen in one day. We're also not just going to wake up one day and magically there's no government as we know it. There's going to have to be transitional attributes. In regard to government, government will evolve into a system of interdisciplinary technicians which oversee the technical processes which govern society. Remember, there is no longer such a thing as social theory in the opinionated ways, opinionated gestures that we've come to know. Society now is going to be looked upon as a physical science. A single unit operating on the basis of natural law for the benefit of all, if you will. Within this structure are also going to be numerous safeguards, redundancy, and methods of helping society in the event of fires and disasters, to reference back to your point of problems not having solutions. Moving on to the legal reality, the goal is to systematically reduce crime by addressing the root causes. If we give people what they need and we get rid of the price system of restriction, I think we'll see a 90% drop in most crime. The other 10% will still require treatment. Crime is a public health issue. It isn't some unavoidable human anomaly. So with 90% of crime gone, hypothetically, 90% of the police would be gone, 90% of the incarceration institutions are gone, and this is the pattern. And hopefully through time, violent acts such as murder due to jealousy or the like will subside to levels almost non-existent as people begin to learn how to live together in a civilized manner, in a system that supports that civility. Again, it's a process. And with regard to the crackhead, let me just say that drug abuse of this severe nature can also be tracked to environmental influence, as per studies have shown. Also, drug use will no longer be a punishable, punitive offense, if you will. We live today in a profoundly sick culture which puts nonviolent drug offenders, which are mainly just sick, confused people, into prisons rather than giving them the medical treatment that they actually need. In the future, these people will be helped for the sickness that they have, not punished, which only makes things worse. And I don't even want to reflect on what the current prison population is with regard to nonviolent drug offenders. I think it's above 40%, if not 60%. It's somewhere in between, but it's truly an abomination and extremely anti-humane and a farce and utterly counterproductive. Anyway. 51. Does the Zeitgeist movement advocate a system of direct democracy when it comes to social issues, or will computers be used for this as well? Democracy in a resource-based economy comes in the form of contribution through action, not talk. Just as with technocracy and their tenets, we seek to have people in positions of decision-making or control because of what they have accomplished, not what they say they will accomplish, which is the political nature we see today. You don't take a vote from your football team as to which doctor you should go to perform surgery on your leg. You want to see the performance record of the doctor and then compare this record with others to evaluate. Social governance has to work the same way. The basis of voting, as we have seen today, is again a total farce. The illusion is so massive that people still think that going and pushing a button on a voting machine every couple of years actually translates into some kind of relevant social participation. Sorry, it doesn't do anything. Once we overcome this ancient, ineffective tradition of blind voting, we will hopefully move into a system which has a process of evaluation that is based on merit and skills. Rather than just reach a consensus about a person, which is what we do now, we will reach consensus about the focus that should be acquired regarding specific projects and ideas. That is true social participation. Engaging actual elements, again, not voting for some random Yahoo who has no background in any technical understandings, which is universally the case. When we understand most problems are technical, when we look at Congress in the United States, it becomes utterly comedic as to why these people are in the positions that they are. Obviously, subjective values is what is dominant there. So anyway, moving on, yes, choice exists in the new system, but opinionated choice needs to be balanced against inferential objective reasoning. While participation is, of course, invited, logic is not to be displaced by the whims of a majority which might not know any better. This is why we talk about arriving at decisions rather than merely making them. As tough as it is to admit, the majority is often wrong. And just because the majority wants something does not mean it's viable and correct. This is a complex line that needs to be understood. We have to grow out of this idea that just because the dominant group of a particular order wants something, that decision is actually the best route to go. The majority cannot vote, for example, to change the fundamental laws of physics or the survival requirements that we need as a species to survive. And that is where the basis of our true decision-making process needs to sprout from. In the end, the value of the majority is only as good as the education of that group. In a resource-based economy, decisions are arrived at through direct technical evaluation on a per-case basis, likely through the processes of computers that can take in many, many variables that humans can't, and artificial intelligence, etc. We've all talked about this at length before. However, in the event, say, a decision moves into the realm of the subjective, then the majority consensus can be ascertained in a very direct way. They vote for it. Consensus can be reached for certain attributes, but that is not where the basis of society should exist upon. It's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. Where am I? Let me think about this. The central data system that we've talked about will allow for people to interact, design their own goods for production, and contribute their knowledge for infrastructure projects and everything else. People will contribute their inventions and ideas directly, and will use public and consumer demand statistics to decide what is produced overall. This, again, is true participation. The noise we hear from the political establishment, which we think is actually important or relevant, will simply not exist in the future, in my opinion. Also, true participation, again, isn't electing so-called leaders. It's working on the actual issues themselves. I just want to reiterate that because I think it's very, very important. So let me summarize this point because I've jumped around a little bit. We want to create a system that gets as far away from human opinion, subjective biases, and emotional whims as possible. We need objective decisions, and computers, very simply, are the only tools we have for arriving at such conclusions in the most accurate way possible. When you understand that all of our problems are technical, this begins to make perfect sense. And I know for some of you this is all going to sound very foreign because no one's ever thought about society in this way before, really. And in the event that the output of such logic-based systems fails, then human consensus is brought in as a secondary process, generally speaking. So I don't want to spend a bunch of time. I could probably talk at length about this issue, and I do have a very descriptive knowledge database article that I've been trying to find time to clarify and finish regarding how participation in the system operates in a very, very descriptive way, and I hope to get that up soon. But let me continue. Number 52, do you think that a gradual shift from monetary economics to a resource-based economy would be better than a sudden implementation? Well, I do, but of course it's very hard to know what could happen. But yes, as I said before, there are a number of ways this can unfold. However, to be frank, I don't really see it occurring in a step-by-step manner in total. It's so difficult, and there isn't enough rational thought in the system to allow for it. The vested interests, for example, will fight it the whole way, constantly slowing the progress, I think. Sadly, it's probably going to take a series of biosocial pressures, a series of crises, most likely in effect, that are outside of our control to make the shift or to give a push towards the shift. But then again, we'll just have to wait and see. But a gradual process would be wonderful. It's very hard to reconcile. Number 53, how will resources be allocated for research? Well, I guess that would be based on the needs of the research and the state of resources in total consideration. Since we have a monitoring system in place, it is simple to access the state of integrity at that point in time. As far as the relevance of the research itself, social needs, in other words, problems that need resolution, would be given priority based on the relevance of them, and then to the types of research conducted naturally. So there's a very obvious logical train of unfolding regarding how things would be prioritized in the system based on necessity and ranked as such, which can be removed from subjectivity based on the total effect it has on particular instances in the society, whatever the context may be. Number 53, do you think that a resource-based economy should be the only type of economic system in the world? And if so, don't you think this may hinder progress or perhaps a better system in the future, or limit people's freedom of choice in the same way that our current economic system is doing? Well, first of all, a resource-based economy, as we stated, is a global system in its purest form. For it takes into account the resources of the entire planet. It has to. This is what logic demands in order to be thorough in our understanding about the carrying capacity of the Earth and everything that comes from that. So the logic to monitor and regulate our actions around resources and natural processes is a given if our goal is to intelligently sustain ourselves and the society. There is really no way around this fundamental reality. Given that, I see no reason as to why resource monitoring would ever change as the system evolves, but beyond that, yes, change will always be anticipated and expected, and the cities and society itself will always be emergent. There's no stopping that. Jacques has always talked about this. While the underlying logic, again, holds true, constant permutation and improvement will always occur. So I don't think the issue you address really holds true when you consider the foundational tenets and philosophy, if you will, of the direction itself. Number 54, given that everything will be run by computers, is the system not at risk of being hacked? I realize everyone will not will have no reason to do this, but today you see many hackers who do it just to show that they can. Hacking can be anticipated and overcome with various levels of redundancy. Remember, in the price system which we live, there is very little redundancy put into place due to the expense associated. This barrier will no longer exist. Instead of having one server for the control of a particular sector of a city structure, there will be 4, for example. The levels of redundancy can also be quantitatively arrived at through experience and practice. So keep this in mind. Again, back to the other point very quickly, why would a person hack the system that feeds them? In the current model we live, there is very little reason for people to really care about their surroundings if you haven't noticed. However, in the new system, hopefully people will finally understand that they are the environment and each other. Number 55, don't you think we're cutting it a bit close by waiting for a collapse before doing anything? Well, we're not cutting anything close. The fact is this type of change will not occur unless there is some form of pressure or problem to give people a reason to want to change. I think I already addressed this, so I'm not going to belabor it here, and I'm going to move on. We don't want collapse per se. We want people to see what is coming and why, knowing that there is an alternative, and hopefully see action to move towards that alternative. Number 56, isn't the Zeitgeist movement a communist movement in the true sense of the word? I realize the form of communism used by the Soviets involved money, but that wasn't how it was intended to be. I generally agree with you, but let's just point out that communism was never really related to natural resources as the starting point of earthly social decisions. Communism was always a social theory. A resource-based economy moves us out of the realm of social theory into the realm of physical science. Number 57, a concerned complaint I often get often involves mining in a resource-based economy and how that would affect sacred lands. Just yesterday someone said that it all sounds great, but the Venus Project will just dig holes in the ground to propagate resources and won't respect the wishes of indigenous people regarding their land. This is a value issue, and it's certainly a complex problem, and I will likely... People will likely see conflict and transition on some level, just as you see similar conflicts today. Again, the transition is very hard in light of these highly traditionalized values because they serve as emotional barriers, if you will. We simply have to be patient. In the end, there has to be a reason for the need to acquire such land for mining, as you put it. And since the system is based not on vested monetary interest anymore, but rather on the welfare of the society as a whole, I think agreement could be achieved if the indigenous understood the social good which would come if they simply allowed their land to be harvested, and of course were able to reap the benefits of that. So I see it as a compromise that can be made, given the intent to help everyone. Number 58. We can't rely on the existing resource infrastructure to build a resource-based economy. It would be too costly and inefficient and polluting. Why not advocate the construction of something that could lead to the construction of a resource-based economy city? We need to build sustainable, automated, not-for-profit industries that could provide the infrastructure and resources to help during the collapse and build a resource-based economy city. Well, if you can go out and build a sustainable, automated, not-for-profit industry and then keep pace with the competition in that industry itself, I'd like to see it. The problem in this context is dealing with the current model and the conflicts therein. I agree with you. However, I would love to see new infrastructure methods in the sense you described be implemented. I mean, this is again a complex transitional issue. The breakdown of the current infrastructure is indeed going to make the transition that much harder, and it's a very unfortunate reality. We could have spent the trillions, I don't even know what it is. We could have spent the $1 trillion+ and I know it's much more than that went into the Iraq war. We could have spent that on a Manhattan Project, if you will, for renewable energy reform and implementation. We didn't because the priorities are not there. This is an unfortunate reality with regard to the obtuse and utterly illogical vested priorities that are currently dominating the world. It's a sad thing. Number 59, the way I see it, we only have about 3 to 5 years before something worse than Greece is all over the world. Let me read this. So I don't think that building a city would be possible within that time or with a collapse. that the whole efficient old infrastructure will fail and it would take more than 10 years after the collapse to even start building. So 5, 20, 10, 35 years before we even start building, at least over 5 billion lives will be lost before we start building. I don't see this as acceptable when we could all do a lot better if we actually apply ourselves and think and plan and design. Well, look, while I hear your speculation, I would advise you not to make such large presumptions. No one knows exactly what is going to happen, and it is futile to make such a projection. There are too many variables, and to get as specific as you claim to be. We have to do the best that we can with what we have to work with. Public awareness is still the most powerful method for change at this time. And as I've said before, nothing's going to change unless the educational imperative is spread, meaning that we have to get this information out to people so they understand where to move into and what to support as things continue to get unstable. Number 60. Okay, 19 minutes left. Everyone listen carefully. I'm going to go very fast. Professor Frank Thiener, Emeritus Professor of Microbiology at the Australian National University, predicts that the human race will be extinct within the next 100 years. He states that the population increase and unbridled consumption is what will kill us. He also states this in an irreversible situation, and I think it's too late. I try not to express that because people are trying to do something, but they keep putting it off. Okay, well, I can relate to Professor Frank Fenner, generally speaking, but I'm also very cynical of anyone who thinks they understand and can make such future predictions. Again, there are so many variables and unknowns that can alter things in ways we never expected, especially technological advancements that can happen very quickly after a couple of years, which no one would have been able to anticipate. This has occurred historically. But I'll try to find more time to review his work. Number 61, why hasn't the Venus Project or Zeitgeist Movement began to utilize its influence, strength, and numbers to actually build basic resource centers that undercut the corporatocracy's profit stream? We don't have the numbers yet to do this, and finding and building is not going to change anything unless there's a decent amount of global support behind it, in theory, much more than what we have today, of course. We're just simply not there yet. So we're in initial phase. There are other projects that will come forward which might include money, in fact, but we're not there yet. Number 62, the communication arm of the Venus Project, aka the Zeitgeist Movement, only engages in communication as opposed to uploading public videos of science experiments. I'm sorry, either this got truncated, I'm not quite sure, but I don't really follow, and I think I addressed part of this earlier. Zeitgeist Movement is working on methods of communication, yes, and the science we discuss has mostly already been done. It just hasn't been implemented or thought about in the holistic sense that we incorporate. Number 63, the Zeitgeist Movement emphasizes the interdependence of every human in humanity and the priority of humanity's goals over individual goals. Hence, it is a collective ideology. I'm going to assume this statement is supposed to show that that we are collectivists by some label, and that someone has the idea that people working together is apparently a bad thing. I'm not even going to go into the blatantly idiotic idea that detached self-interest somehow translates into social well-being, this religious notion of the invisible hand, which has no fundamental support. This is just false. We live in a symbiotic environment on all levels. If you're not detached from anything, and to act as such is to disregard a fundamental understanding needed for personal and social survival. Also, the idea of the greater good does not mean one's personal interests are just blanketly overwritten for the sake of the community. This is a kind of a propaganda notion put forward by this sort of anti-society mentality that supports the current competitive open market model. The system we describe, a resource-based economy, accounts for both personal and social progress simultaneously. They are interconnected, and the only thing that will override either of them is empirical reasoning in regard to certain operations, such as food production or other social needs, which are governed by natural science and inferential logic, not politics. So I hope that clarifies that a little bit. Number 64, the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project worship magic robots. Dun, dun, dun. Well, that's cute. I think I already addressed the ignorant projections people have with regard to the use of automation technology. Number 65, we don't need to remove money. Apparently that's a blanket complaint. All I can say is please go back and review my lectures, Money and the Dynamics of the Monetary Market Paradigm. create nothing but problems by the very inherent nature of the system dynamics. It isn't human greed. For example, human greed is rather a product of experience as a result of the impositions of the system itself. Number 66, Peter Joseph thinks it's possible to colonize planets in the future. I'm not quite sure where that came from. I have a suspicion at some point I must have been talking about the rate of human population growth and the empirical reality that if the rates continue unabated, it's simply a matter of time before people will be forced off the planet due to spatial limitations. I mean, this is just fundamental logic. It doesn't matter if it takes 500 years or 5,000 years. Nothing can grow and multiply forever in a closed system, which is basically what the Earth is. Beyond that, I don't recall talking about the issue of planetary colonization directly. Even though scientists have talked about the possibility of terraforming planets, other planets for many, many years, so it's not some outrageous claim. It's also not out of context. I mean, it is a projected assumption of infeasibility often, but this is, of course, unfounded historically. The same kind of thing could be said about people who said they wanted to go to the moon 100 years ago and were called mooniacs. We have systematically proven naysayers wrong with regard to the abilities of technological advancement and human possibility. Number 67, technological unemployment is not possible. Technological unemployment is not possible because the same amount of human people are required to run the machines that are used to replace manual labor. No, the removal of labor through applying automation has never shown to keep up unemployment equal in any sector. That's not the argument used by those who defend technological unemployment. This is utterly illogical as well, for the goal of automation is in part to remove the human laborer itself, usually for cost-cutting reasons by whatever corporation that implements it. Number 68, Peter Joseph enjoys the work of Jordan Maxwell. Apparently that's an insult of sorts by association. I suspect this must have been stated by one of the many intellectual bigots out there, which, of course, impose walls around themselves and project into others regarding who or what is actually viable to talk about or seriously regard. Look, I don't discriminate against anyone for their ideas. And in most cases, I find something to learn from just about every single person I encounter, even people that might be considered completely and utterly mentally insane by some. This is the nature of understanding human experiential culminations and what comprises the character of a human being. As far as Jordan Maxwell, I think he did a great job historically of bringing the issue of astrotheology up when no one was talking about it many years ago. No one really knew about it. Do I agree with everything he says? Of course not. I don't believe everything anyone says. So anyway, I encourage all of you out there not to become victims of inhibition due to the imposed taboos of thought, actually, coming from the state or these self-appointed guardians of the status quo that seek some type of vehement benefit from trying to deter people from going down certain avenues of investigation. It's an extremely bizarre thing, but sadly it's prevalent. Just stay open-minded, be your own person, and make your own decisions. Number 69, the Venus Project is registered as for-profit. Okay, the Venus Project has two sections, as I've said, 501c, nonprofit known as Future by Design, and their commercial educational work under the compass of the Venus Project itself. The 501c is underneath the Venus Project. Yes, part of the Venus Project is for profit. If you have any cognitive dissonance over this fact that they sell things to survive, just like everyone else has to do, you're being utterly irrational with regard to the nature of the system we live in. Number 70, the Zeitgeist Movement does not advocate donating to institutions who give to poverty. Again, no. We focus on the source, yet we have never not advocated donating to such institutions. Please do. However, don't be naive. This is simply patchwork, and the goal of the Zeitgeist Movement is to overcome the patchwork and focus on the problems directly. Number 71, Jock is not fully qualified as an industrial engineer. Okay, well, this is a credentialism argument, and in the end is utterly meaningless. We need to judge people based on what they do and have done, their individual merit, not what pieces of paper say about them. Jock has invented hundreds of useful things, many on an industrial scale. He has numerous patents, and if you listen to his description of the city systems he advocates and the components therein and the reasoning for it, and the internal infrastructure, which he doesn't often talk about, but he knows very much about, you will see that his ability within the medium of, quote, industrial engineering is profoundly informed and educated. 72, the Zeitgeist movement has Raelian movement similarities. Okay, the Raelian movement is about aliens. The Zeitgeist movement is about intelligently applying modern science for social progress. By the way, Jock was given an award by the Raelian movement as, I don't remember the distinction, but Jock had never even heard of this group before this award was mailed to him. What this group, the Raelians, tend to do is they find someone that they like and they make a public display by giving them an award, assuming that the association, I think, will come back to them in some type of positive way, or they'll attract more people or something. That's a kind of an underhanded tactic, I think. It puts Jock in, it puts people in a weird light as though this association was actually real. Anyway, next, number 73, the Venus Project is just a repackaged Atlantis. I have no idea where this comes from. And in the end, who cares where any of this comes from or where any idea comes from? We must take and evaluate each concept on its own merit. I'll say it again. That is the only legitimate measure of quality of any concept. 74, there is an image of hands raised in the light in the shape of a triangle in your movie, therefore it's New World Order. You're referring, yes, to Zeitgeist Addendum, and there's a common stock video that's used in the film to show the connection, gestural connection of the sun to a person. This expression is symbiotic. There's no, in fact, difference in this expression than I think a shot that happens right before it, which shows an individual lifting of water in his hands as well, showing, again, the symbiotic relationship of humans to the environment. That's it. Went well with John Perkins' poetic statement on interconnection. Those that have projected such insanity, I feel for you. Number 74, the Zeitgeist movie questions religion, therefore it's New World Order. Okay, this is completely beside the point here, but let me say that religious fundamentalists have historically condemned anyone opposed to their views by calling them evil, satanic, or the like. The New World Order nonsense is just another way to not have to face information itself. It's a form of attack the messenger or a project, or state that it's a part of some underlying conspiracy against the religion itself. Such is the convoluted nature of modern denial with regard to religious indoctrination. Number 76, we are all a bunch of hippies. We play the smug pseudo-intellectual card to make up for a lack of power we feel within the current system. Well, that's very cute. And I would like everyone to reflect on the basic treatment of those who have been encouraged to learn and be smart historically. Remember when you were a kid and you were excelling at school, and guess what they called you? They called you a nerd. It's amazing to see the rampant anti-intellectualism that exists in our society, which starts right from the early school years, especially in the West. Evidently, being cool means not caring and not learning in some circles. So it doesn't surprise me that the same dissenting rhetoric would be applied towards us. We're just a bunch of know-it-alls or arrogant or whatever. This, again, is a psychological scapegoat for those who refuse to actually look at the data itself. And I'm going to leave it at that and move on. Number 77, I only have 7 minutes left. I was really hoping to get through all these. We're getting there. If you have an antique family heirloom and someone takes it from you, there will be no law to stop them. Well, let's see. Respect for such personal items is really a given in a world of communal understanding and balance, I think. Mutual respect will thrive because people understand the conflicts that ensue otherwise. During the transition, there'll still be laws to govern property and things like this. It has to be. But as time goes on, I'll see how people will not see the benefit of such acts, for there's no reward. Stealing someone's family heirloom, why? So these types of arguments that are brought up, these abstractions, there are so many other things that completely override this notion. So I really believe human general decency and sense of reciprocation, which will be reinforced by the system, will override these rather juvenile complaints that are more or less baseless in abstraction, based in abstraction, fundamentally. Number 78, it's actually 77. 7. We want to, here we go. We want to kill off the majority of the Earth's population. We are controlled by the Rothschilds, a.k.a. we're a New World Order front. Well, damn, they figured us out, didn't they? Sorry, I can't pretend that this statement is worth any serious notion, so I'm moving on. Number 78, the Zeitgeist Movement is an atheistic ally of the Tea Party and other minded affiliates that promote anti-government rhetoric in order to help rationalize the continued reduction of governments and the benefits that they provide to society. Okay, well, this statement is just utterly loaded with projection, and I think I'll pass on this as well. I really don't understand the issue being brought up. We seek both localization of industry while also having, such as Jacques City systems, while also having a global technical interconnection for all earthly monitoring. It has nothing to do with the Tea Party or anything in existence today. Number 79, it's hard to understand the Zeitgeist Movement. Can you explain how concisely as possible what makes this movement distinct from others? What makes the Zeitgeist Movement unique? Okay. The Zeitgeist Movement takes into account the root causes of social problems and wishes to change them at the core level. From this, we find that the entire socioeconomic system is unsustainable inherently. Therefore, we seek to create a new social system called a resource-based economy, which is based upon resource management as the initial starting point of all relevant social decisions. As far as I know, no other ism or group is doing anything like this. While certain environmental groups support attributes of what we describe, the idea of a total system is almost never suggested, at least not in my experience. Number 80, that will never work. This will never work because of human nature. Okay. Those who use the term human nature usually really don't even have a clue what they're even referencing. To say that there is a human nature would mean that it would have to apply to every single human on the planet without exception. And when it comes to human behavior, we see nothing but vast variation across all cultures. Conflict, war, crime are hence social phenomena. I mean, they have to be. There's no other explanation. While I agree we humans do need to survive and live and eat and the like, we do have a nature to want to live, I suppose, usually. The manner by which we achieve those ends is decided utterly by the cultural environment which we live. Number 81. I spoke to someone who said after we only enlist a certain percentage of the population, we will then attempt more forceful education. Can you deny this? Forceful education. Sorry, I don't really understand, and I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to keep moving on. 82, talking to a lot of friends, family about the Venus Project, and they love the ideas, although they just can't see it ever happening. One friend said, humans are not evolved enough. I told him it was human behavior that had to be changed and nothing to do with evolution, but he doesn't see it that way. Any ideas? Yes, sure. All I have to do is show him the vast diversity and countless contradictions of behavior which occur across the globe, across many cultures, as an initial thing to show. I mean, it's pretty blatant when you really spread it out. The evidence for behavioral diversity is everywhere, and science has now begun to show that we often do what we're reinforced to do, just like other animals are. And as far as not being evolved enough yet, well, this is probably a viable point in gesture, hence the need for a transition. The real question, I think, is really, are we mature enough yet? That's what I would say. And it's a legitimate question, but it doesn't change the focus and overall goal. Number 83, the Zeitgeist Movement is going to bring in a one-world religion. Okay, well, this brings us back to the fundamentalist religious zealots. Look, I'm not even going to go into this, as the very premise here is too intangible to reconcile legitimate thought. It's just superstition based upon superstition. 84, the Zeitgeist Movement is Marxism. As noted before, regarding communism, which in practice was the outgrowth of some of Marx's ideas, it was never based on the planet's resources itself. It was just a social theory. 85, how do you incorporate the scientific method when examining social issues? It relies on variables to be set, and so someone must decide how weighted each aspect of social welfare is. This is subjective. Hold on a second. How do you incorporate the scientific method of social issues? Okay, I have 1 minute left in the actual live broadcast, first of all. I'm going to continue to go through the remainder of the points after this broadcast ends. So anyone that wants to come back and hear the rest of these, simply wait a couple minutes and load it back in. So I just want to go ahead and throw that out there. I'm going to be cut off here probably in about a minute, so just bear with that. Regarding the question, how do you incorporate the scientific method when examining social issues? This is probably one of the most complex questions that requires an intense amount of detail to explain, which I intend to do in the knowledge database. Social issues are still technical issues. When you get rid of the indoctrinated values that color those impressions and keep them organized in a particular frame of reference. Sorry to sound so abstract, but that's essentially the issue. So the social issues are just technical issues. Is it a social issue to get rid of poverty? Actually, poverty is a technical issue. So the scientific method applies to all of these things based on how we utilize our resources. There are many different avenues I could go about that, but I'm going to leave it at that due to time restraints. And I want the person that asked the question to wait for the knowledge database issue that I will have on this issue. And if you want to ask me again in another radio broadcast, that'll be fine. But it's such a large question that I really don't want to spend a ton of time with it at this point in time. So let's go on to 86. Healthcare versus education, or in a simple example, my choice to grow a huge tree in my garden at the expense of my neighbor having to trim the bit that hangs over to his side. Okay. Well, again, any problem or action that cannot be resolved through direct technical processing will be available for public consensus, as stated before. However, all problems, even social, again, are ultimately technical. The subjective conflict here comes from values, not reality. As far as the choice to grow a tree, a huge tree, disregarding what it might do to your neighbor's yard is an unsustainably selfish and inconsiderate conflict-inducing action. If you have to communicate with the individual, you would need to speak with your neighbor to reach a consensus, since it affects him as well. This is just fundamental human interaction and respect. Basic human communication. People in the future will understand that they share the earth together. And this is a basic decency-promoting, sustainable issue. People are decent to each other in many ways that are not regulated by legislation in the modern day. There is a general unspoken decency. Why? Because people generally want to avoid conflict. Unfortunately, the system in certain ways doesn't reinforce this. So people do need legal prosecutions to do things against others that have selfish mentalities that don't want to consider their existence. So this is a reality, and it's a difficult and tricky topic, but really it's almost an arbitrary issue because you just have to be respectful towards each other. This is not some mystery. You have to live from the disposition of social integration if you want to live in a society at all. I mean, that's what the whole foundation of. So it sort of goes without saying. Number 86, the Zeitgeist Movement states that psychopathy is caused by upbringing or other social cultural influences instead of recognizing it as a genetic problem. Hence, it is unable to cope with it properly. Hence, it is prone to fall victim to psychopaths, just like the current society has. I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at here. The Zeitgeist Movement and its references to scientific literature on the subject of human behavior does not disregard genetic influence, if that's your point. There's always a combination of environment and genes in interaction. We simply hone our focus to the most catalytic side, which is provably the environment. I hope that answers your question. 87. Quote, statement, if no one has jobs, everyone will just sit around all day playing video games and getting fat. Okay, well, I think I addressed the issue of motivation in a prior point. In the current system, people hate their jobs very often because, and not to mention they suffer, generally speaking, from a certain level of deprivation. And I think lazy behaviors are really a consequence of dealing with these realities that are very unfortunate and can be very problematic for each individual person based on their state of affairs. So in a lot of ways, it comes down to kind of a value issue, doesn't it? And I don't think just because people live in a world that's designed to take care of them that they will just do nothing. There's really nothing to support that disposition, which I assume is what you're implying. In fact, if you look at the more well-to-do people, those that have an abundance of resources, very often these are also the same people that are very busy and they're also very productive. They don't just sit around and do nothing. They're often very intense, in fact. Remember, again, our current system strips us of our curiosities as we grow, and we are more or less forced into little occupational categories for our survival and hence need to get money. This rather demeaning pattern will no longer occur and its effects will indeed fade. Number 88, in my life under the monetary system, I have been compelled to do many terrible things. I've hurt people in ways that I am very ashamed of, and I did it for money. But now I want to be a part of the Venus Project. Is there a place in the system for people like me? Listen, everybody in the current system is a criminal by definition, one way or another. There is no moral ground or ethics in a world designed to battle itself for survival. So yes, we are all victims of culture here, and we all, even, yeah, I'm not even going to go on the tangent of how people bullshit themselves into thinking they're ethical in a system that's explicitly unethical. Anyway, number 89, I have just watched The Future of Food. I tried to discuss what I learned with a friend and what the Venus Project Zeitgeist Movement proposed as possible solutions. My friend insisted that if big business wants to take over our food production, there is no movement in the world that can do anything about it. We have all the power, they have all the power, and we, the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project, are just wasting our time. Okay. The idea that big government and business are omnipotent and hence unstoppable is proven wrong simply by historical reflection. We have overcome power domination over and over again. They just keep sprouting up for various reasons, mainly because of the nature of the system itself. Just pick up a book on Gandhi, and you'll see this type of active reform occurring. It really just takes a critical mass to shift the tides. There's no reason to assume nothing can't be overcome. It's just an intellectual scapegoat to not want to put forward the energy, in my opinion. Number 90, why criticize the free market system specifically when it is the market system generally that is the problem? There are, I would say that these issues are really the same thing in the context that we talked about. There is no market system on the planet that isn't open or free in some way. The entire world operates in a free market now, and this is basically synonymous with market by traditional association. And sorry for any confusion with terminology. I know, for example, I tend to say economics often when I really should say monetary economics to be specific, but I use it as a shorthand discussion because I know what people know exactly what I'm referring to. I mean, there's no other economic system really in practice in the world today, so I just say economics as a shorthand, and usually everyone knows what I'm referring to. However, I will try to not generalize in the future, for I know it can cause confusion to those that are really unfamiliar. But back to your overall issue, the free market is the market system. If you can describe a market system to me that isn't open in some form or a variation on the quote free market, I'll be very surprised, at least one that's in existence. Number 93, after 2 years of spreading Zeitgeist Movement awareness, the main objection is, how could we possibly get from here to there? Because they can't visualize a transition, they dismiss it by its implausibility. Well, I've already addressed this. Just because you don't know how to get from point A to point B doesn't resolve the need to do so. Number 94, if we insult somebody by putting their religion down, how will we ever get everyone to join us? It's understood that we are not insulting them. It's just the way they are taking the content of the religious views. Well, yeah, anyone questioning any aspect of most religions, regardless of how logical or relevant their points are, is almost always going to be met with resistance and even assumptions of insult or disrespect. This is the nature of dogma, and Islam at this stage is so insane that people are offended if someone just draws a picture of their prophet Muhammad. it doesn't get much more extreme than that and irrational than that. In the end, we just have to be strategic with these groups, while of course still being honest. It's a very complex problem, and I agree. Number 95, Peter, what happens if everybody wants to travel into space? We don't have the resources for a space travel for everyone, and if a little group is able to go to the space, other people may feel inferior because they can't. You can't satisfy infinite needs. Well, what if everyone wanted a 100-room mansion on a private island? What if everyone wanted 500 dogs living on their property? What if everyone wants a house made out of diamonds? Values, again, which is what this is about, are only relevant if they can be sustained. And you have to have an understanding of the natural world and the limitations therein for behavior to be relevant, at least in regard to what you describe. People are going to have to grow up and realize the interconnected, interdependent world they share. We share this planet, and there are inherent limitations. That it is simply the simple reality is that people are going to have to update their values accordingly. And I know that's a controversial statement, but I can't think of a more honest way to point that out. And the final question, which is labeled as number 96, in a resource-based economy, if I was to find a valuable resource, a rare mineral, for instance, which was not accounted for in the system's database, and then use it for my own personal exploits, would this obviously be frowned upon? And would there be any attempt to restrict or control this mineral I found? Could I use resources I have discovered for my own endeavors, or would I be forced to turn it in? The question is not would you be forced. The question is why would you choose to do this? Why would you prefer to keep the resource rather than inputting it into the system that helps everyone, including yourself, that is the mother, if you will, of helping and making sure there's a high standard of living for everyone in society? The real issue is that you would only hurt yourself in the long run from such a practice or ideology. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay, I'm done with this one. I hope that was beneficial. If there's anything I wasn't clear on, I will put up a post for the next radio broadcast, which, again, I apologize for the intermittency, but I'm doing too much right now. But I can address any other question that hopefully I didn't miss. I believe I got through everything. There's only a few that I bypassed because of high levels of absurdity or a complete lack of understanding. But you can post those again on a new forum thread that I will eventually put up for the next show. Anyway, I hope this was beneficial, and I appreciate everybody listening, and I'll talk to everyone soon. Take care.